of your burdens and your past, all remorse. Every seed will one day just leave us. Use your time well, because it's loads of you love and Today is today is falling away. We're not confined to ashes. We are the link, not the chain.
Hello, I'm Deanna Cabarrus from Songwriting Lessons Online, and today I have a very special guest joining us for this live stream, Mike Philippov, who runs the website Practice Guitar Now. He is really the most precise analyst of technique and knowledge and process that I have ever come across. And I haven't seen anyone who has got the same perspective on how we can make our musical processes work for us and make our practice time work for us, how we can analyze whatever might be holding us back from doing the things that we want to do and how sometimes that's not what we think it is. So I'm really excited he's come to talk to us today. Please say hi in the chat, have your questions ready for him. He has got illuminating things to say about almost any aspect of practice that you can think of. So without further ado, I'm going to bring him on. Hello, Mike.
Hello, Deanna. Hello, everybody. Great to be here. Oh, Deanna, I think you are muted.
There we go. Okay, so I have seen you analyze guitar playing movements and musical fragments in absolutely minute detail. And you're very good at designing practice systems and practice approaches in line with helping people fix their technique or address an aspect of their musicianship that is getting in the way of them being able to improve. So this is really helpful for songwriters, because anyone who wants to write a song is going to have a lot of areas to be across, both playing areas and knowledge areas. If we're going to write a song, we have to know about writing the words, writing the melodies, writing the harmonies. We have to know about rhythm. I mean, if you're somebody who's interested in music and composition, you could become a specialist in any of these areas. You could become a specialist in programming bass drum sounds. So if we want to get to the point where we are performing our own material, there are a lot of skill areas. And then after we've got done with writing the music, playing it, singing it at the same time. And most of us have limited time with which to pursue our interests in this area, and it's hard to know what to focus on, or when something doesn't sound the way we want to, or we're frustrated with something, it can be hard to know what the solution is going to be to that or what we should address. So we might have one songwriter who feels more confident singing than playing, or another songwriter might feel that they can write words pretty easy, but that writing melodies is hard. A third songwriter might feel like they can play guitar riffs all day, and they can come up with riffs all day, but that singing feels sort of challenging and exposing. And I think sometimes it's easy for us to identify what it is that we need to know in order to progress. So if I don't play an instrument at all and I want to sing and play, I'm going to have to learn some chords. And that's fairly clear. But quite often once we've got past an absolute beginner stage, there's so many different things we could work on that it's very hard for us to know which one we should be doing or concentrating on first. So we can't really make the best use of our limited music and songwriting time unless we know what areas to focus on, but it's hard for us to know with our own incomplete knowledge as improver or intermediate musicians what that should be. So I have questions for you related to those things. Is there a simple way that we can diagnose what our limiting factors are at different times, work out how we might address those? Does feeling confident about what we're working on help us get through perhaps exercises that are a bit less fun to do? And I wanted to ask, before we start on the practical things, whether there is a mindset that would support us going about this, because it's quite common that we instinctively tend to spend more time on the things that we feel somewhat at ease with and somewhat more confident on, and less time on the things that we find awkward or annoying or that reveal our weaknesses to us. Because things that we feel that we can't do very well can make us feel sucky. So there's sort of an emotional barrier to acknowledging and even just sort of looking at the areas that are limiting us. And then on top of those, sometimes the practical remedies are a bit laborious. So to this day, the things that I have to do that I should be doing to improve my musicianship in the areas that I want to progress in can require like a lot of determination. It's sometimes not that inviting to look at those things, especially if the things that you need to do don't give you any like instant feedback, or you don't have. It's just you're just gonna have to do this for a certain amount of time, and you don't get any sense right after one session of that thing helping. Do you have any mindset advice first for cultivating a different relationship with skill areas that we lack?
I do. I do. So one thing that I always found helpful for me, as far as the mindset, is learning to enjoy the process of working on my skills by seeing myself like literally as Rocky in the Rocky movies when he was going through like the training montage scenes. If you think about, those movies or any movies like The Karate Kid or, stuff like that, where there's an extensive transformation in the main character that precedes some big achievement, that process of transformation in the movie, of course, is depicted all dramatically with music and stuff, and it looks cool. To me, that was really, really exciting to always watch stuff like that. And when I was learning to play guitar, that is how I visualized the process of practicing. And as long as I knew that the work I was putting in was going to make me better, I was all over it. I was ready to sit there for 2, 3, 4, 5 hours a day, however long it took, because I enjoyed it, and I saw myself from like a third person perspective as like the Rocky of guitar, if you will. And I'm finding that when I teach students of mine, students who either naturally have a similar attitude or whom I'm able to get to have more of that attitude tend to progress the most, because they end up practicing kind of for its own sake, because they enjoy the process. And when they uncover something that is that they can't do very well, that makes them feel sucky, as you mentioned, it's actually that they reframe it and they see it. Wow, if I just get better at this, I'm obviously going to become a better musician, better songwriter, better guitar player. And on top of that, if the process is also fun, because I'm feeling like I'm becoming a better version of myself, as it were, it's just a no-brainer to keep putting in the work. Another little mindset hack that I've heard from a guy that I studied non-musical topics from, he says, imagine that you are like writing your life story with everything you do. Let's say you're running a business, or learning to play guitar or whatever. And what would make for a really boring story versus a really gripping story, like a really satisfying to read story? Well, a really satisfying to read story is you have to have some struggles. I would say struggles in quotes, because learning to play music is not really a struggle per se, but let's say struggle, right? So the triumph has to be preceded by this struggle, and that is what makes for a satisfying second half of the story. Versus if you had everything kind of handed to you in the beginning, it's not really fun. It's pretty boring. So either of those mindsets I find to be pretty powerful for getting you to not just make yourself do something you don't want to do, but reframe it into something you want to do. Actually, before we leave that topic, the topic of story, there's actually a specific story that I have in mind. This story of Tom Sawyer, where this pretty popular story actually, how the boy Tom Sawyer was punished by his aunt for misbehaving or something, and he had to paint the fence as punishment on the weekend when all his friends were going swimming. And as he was painting the fence, his friends were walking by, like, making fun of him, like, what are you doing, you loser? You should be going swimming with us. And he pretended that he was actually having fun and like so into his work, because it was this important task that only his aunt would only entrust to the most trustworthy boy, and his friends suddenly were like, huh, interesting. Can you let us paint a little bit? And before you know it, he basically got all his friends to paint the fence for him while he was playing with the toys that they gave him in exchange. So the lesson here is that you can reframe something that something that another person would see as boring into something that yet another person can see as totally fun and challenging and exciting. With the task doesn't change, but how you see it changes. So hopefully that gives some perspectives on that.
That makes a lot of sense. And quite often in material of yours that I've observed, you take an almost surgical level of delight in having identified something that could be the tiniest increment better. And I can see, yeah, I think if we take that approach, to me, it sounds like at least two things. Firstly, you're tapping into the power of archetypes. So this idea that we have these different archetypes and we can sort of draw on them when we need to. And I think that's extremely helpful because it can feel like a lot of mental pressure to try and generate something out of yourself that you're not sure if you have. But it's completely different simply thinking, I'm just going to open that cupboard in my mind and tap into that person that lives there and have some of that energy. And the other thing I liked about what you said is that you're not starting from a mental point of like, oh, I'm not good enough, I have to get better at this. You're starting from a point of this. Mike went into his office. He flipped open the top of his laptop. And that you're kind of according a certain level of grandeur to your own existence. And I'm a big believer in that, because if you don't do it, no one else is going to do it for you. So you're not psychologically starting from a point of view of not good enough. You're starting from a point of view of an excellent person has to go and collect this. I have to collect the excellence into my life, into my skills. So that's I think a much more sustainable way of going about it, because discipline and like, oh, I have to do this because I'm not good enough at this is only ever going to get us so far. There's something else that I heard while I was watching the Olympics that I liked because I think it's quite helpful, and it's the rule of thirds when they're training. So if you're finding that what you're doing feels easy and great all the time, you're not challenging yourself enough. But if you're finding that it's completely, everything is a terrible slog, no matter how much you're like, oh, Rocky is struggling a little today, then you're in a zone of too much difficulty. So I quite like that as a very rough ballpark for how things should feel and how we can manage our emotions around that. So in terms of evaluating our strengths and weaknesses and how we actually do this, once we're sort of primed to view those as exciting discoveries rather than proof that we suck, there's a lot of interlocking skills, like we said, that songwriters need to be across before they can get to a point where they can perform their own material. Can you suggest some ways that a person might be able to evaluate where they're at across different areas of songwriting and playing? I know that's really, really broad, but I'm interested to hear any reflections you might have.
Sure. Yes, I do. So one thing you can do, and it's I've kind of taken this also from learning technique and just really general aspects of guitar playing. When it comes to songwriting, look at songwriters who inspire you to become a songwriter, and do your best to analyze the music that that they write, and ask yourself, how are they getting the sound and the emotions that are inspiring to you as the up and coming songwriter? And what that does, and I'm not sure why this thumbs up showed up, I guess because I did this with my thumb. And anyway, and so what that does is it either reveals to you specific skills you need to work on, such as, oh, I see how this person is using rhythm here that is really creative. I've never thought of that. Let me go and examine my rhythm, my ability to use rhythm in my songwriting. Or you may hear a section of music and you're like, this sounds awesome, and I don't know why. That is a good cue to actually look into some songwriting coaching, similar to if you're a guitar player and there's some very technical part that you're struggling to play, and you're like, well, I know what the notes are, I can play them slow, I have no idea how to speed them up or whatever. And if you just if you know what you want but you don't know how to get it, that's basically a perfect recipe for finding somebody who does know and just like getting them to show you. So that's one way. The other way is the first thing I said, where you do your best to analyze the music that you like and try to make a reverse engineered analysis of how they're getting that sound. And oftentimes you will get ideas for skills you need to work on and that you can just sort of pursue on your own, but that also depends on exactly where you are on your journey, as it were, because some people obviously have different levels of all the skills you mentioned earlier, Deanna. Like I'm sure you know this, of course. We're all at different levels with each of those, and so we may be very advanced with one, kind of medium with a few others, and then very low with a few others. And depending on which skill in the music that you're analyzing you become aware of that you have a deficiency in, you may either approach it on your own to bring it up some more, or realize I really need some help here, and then you hire a songwriting coach and build all your skills across the whole spectrum. So that's my thoughts on that.
Yeah, I mean, I think there are limits to what we can diagnose ourselves, but
For sure.
there are some broad categories in which there are easy things to listen for, and I think something that I think can be really helpful is to record yourself just in an informal way and listen back. And quite often we don't do this as often as we might, because we are worried about listening back, not liking what we hear, and then again that mindset thing, and then that making us feel like we aren't where we want to be, and then that's just really difficult. What do we do with that information that it doesn't sound so good? But if you listen for, and again, until you know how all these skills are formed, it can be hard to know why one of them isn't where you want it to be. But there are some simple things you can listen out for, and that's if it's in time, like what the rhythm is. You can listen out for whether the playing, the singing is coming in at the right time. I think especially with singing, people tend to focus more on whether it's in tune, because that's the thing that sticks out to us most. But if it's not in time, even if it's in tune, it's not going to sound that great. And I always give the example of Bob Dylan, because he has very, very rhythmic delivery vocally. And so the fact that his intonation is, not his key strength doesn't matter. If he sang those notes in tune, or doesn't matter as much. Some people don't. He's a bit Marmite as a singer, I guess, but lots of people really have enjoyed his performances for years and years and years, and his recordings. So we can't say that his singing, that he's kind of like somewhat more. Now suddenly realize that people are going to come for me if I criticize Bob Dylan. I'm not criticizing him. I'm just saying that he doesn't necessarily have the vocal chops of someone like Mariah Carey, but he has a very rhythmic delivery. So I think among the things that we can diagnose are things like that. If we record ourselves and listen back for timing, intonation up to a point, and then simply list out what would I like to hear that I'm not hearing, or in which is slightly different thing to listen for than to listen for flaws in, or areas of improvement in the actual playing, singing, songwriting. To say what would it be awesome for me to hear now with my playing or with my singing, or in terms of songwriting. It's a slightly different question, and that can sort of get you going as well in a slightly new direction. So, but I like I think the thing of analyzing whatever you can and starting to cultivate an analytical mindset is really helpful.
And I also, just to follow up, I really like what you said. Can you mute yourself? Thank you. So the negative framed question of when you record yourself and you listen to how it sounds and you ask what is missing, like how can I make this better? This is an awesome question to have applying to all areas of playing. I often actually tell my students to not, let's say when they play something and they want to assess, well, was it clean? Was it in time? Was it in tune? Whatever the case is, instead of asking that question, if you're working on, let's say, your timing, you can pretty much assume that for a while your timing isn't going to be great. So when you play something, okay, where did I mess up the timing? So that's like, it's kind of a negatively framed question, which may seem like it would make you feel bad about yourself as a songwriter. But if you are resting on the foundation of a mindset that you're just becoming, like you said, you're just getting your excellence through this process, you're not going to feel bad about it, even though somebody who doesn't have that mindset probably might. But if you do have that mental mental foundation, you ask yourself that question, it becomes easier to spot, this is where I messed up. Okay, let me refine that some more. Next time I repeat it, where did I mess it up? Well, actually, like nowhere. It's actually good now. After a while, you get to the point where you ask that question and you can't find any flaws. Well, good. That means you are ready for the next step. So I really like that part of what you said.
Thank you. Well, yeah, and I think that over time, obviously, our limiting factors are going to change. And so, my next question was going to be: is there a way that we can diagnose what that is and what our limiting factors might be at different times? But you've sort of answered that, because if you listen back and you ask the question of what do I like, where is this thing gone wrong? Then and if it hasn't anymore, well, now you've sort of addressed that thing in a fairly complete way, and perhaps it's time to put your focus onto something else. I think there's also, it would be helpful to mention comparison here, because there's a lot of, if you're going out to open mics and things like that, there's a lot of comparison. A lot of people feel like they maybe don't have legitimacy yet to call themselves songwriters or musicians because they're learning, or perhaps their chops aren't where they want them to be, or maybe it's a recent thing they've taken up in the last few years, and they're still, their idea of I am somebody who does this stuff is still forming. And so when you have a lot of people who aren't quite sure if they're really allowed to call themselves this, it can foster a sense that you need to earn that right, that legitimacy, by proving some level of technical proficiency. And of course, I think it's great to have the freedom technically, but this question of legitimacy and am I good enough to be able to say I'm a songwriter, and is that person good enough to say they're a songwriter, and if I'm saying it, and there's, all of that you can get very bogged down in all of that. The idea that you're starting from this archetype position in your mind of heroism sort of makes all that go away. Like Rocky doesn't care what push-ups the next guy's doing.
Pretty much. Yes. In addition to that, it's funny you bring that up, because it's very similar to what just guitar players in general. I mean, a lot of guitar players also end up being songwriters. It's just that when I say guitar players, I typically train people on like technique and speed and learning like their physical chops and stuff. There's this idea of trying to box yourself into a different skill level. So a lot of people come to me and they're like, I'm a beginner, I'm an early intermediate player. I don't think I've ever had anybody come to me and say, hey, Mike, I'm a pretty advanced player. I don't think I've ever had that happen, even though when I listen to them play, it's pretty obvious. But in terms of just how people describe themselves, a lot of times people try to downplay themselves. And I'm sure it's kind of that way with songwriting too, because especially probably with songwriting, because it's such a integral part of your ego. With the music you put out there is like a reflection of you. So it's tempting to downplay whatever you can do. And the advice I always tell people is, forget those stupid labels, beginner, intermediate, advanced. The lines are so blurred beyond like being a complete beginner. Like, you started like literally last week. Okay, then you're a complete beginner. But if you've already been doing stuff for 6 months, a year or more, you're probably not a beginner if you've been doing that with any kind of consistency. So the advice I tell people is to just see yourself as, let's say, a songwriter who's on the journey to get better. Because the reality is, it doesn't matter how bad you think you are. After you've been doing something for a year or more consistently, there's plenty of people who are worse than you, who are more beginner than you, if you will. And conversely, no matter how good you think you are, there's a bunch of people who are way better than you. As I train powerlifting, and there's a funny saying people say: doesn't matter how strong you get, there's always some person, some little kid in China, who warms up with your max. So it's the same thing with with songwriting, with guitar, what have you. It doesn't matter how good you get, there's always somebody you can learn from, somebody else you can look up to get inspired by, and so on. And it's just better for your own mindset to know, hey, I am definitely not the worst person at this, but there's always, a big road ahead of me. And that is both liberating and humbling at the same time. And it just gets rid of that, any negative baggage that can drag you down, and just frees you up to pursue the work of getting better and enjoying the process. So that's what I recommend.
Well, I think the archetype thing is helpful for that too, because, there's no unnecessary deferring to some imagined caped crusader of songwriting who's going to come with a large sack and pull a seal out of it that's going to be the seal of approval. To say that you actually do get to call yourself this, or you're going to be waiting a long time. So let's take a couple of case studies. Let's imagine that we've figured out we've got some case studies of people who figured out what their weaknesses is. So let's say we've got one songwriter who feels a lot more confident singing than playing. What would your suggestion be for that person in terms of how they might start to make a practice routine for themselves around playing, in what they would need to do to accompany themselves singing?
Sure. Well, the simplest thing to do is, as you mentioned this earlier, actually, learn to play in time. And a lot of guitar players, students of mine in particular, don't really use the metronome very often, or they use it for the thing it's not really designed for, which is learning to play faster. But really, ultimately, at its core, you have to know how to lock in with the beat and be in time. And if the notes are a little bit sloppy, but they are in time, as you mentioned, with the Bob Dylan example earlier, is way better than the other way around. So work on the timing first. The other thing that makes the physical aspect of playing easier is to do what I call separating the movements of the hands from the notes you're playing. For example, let's take a simple chord progression. The G chord to the C chord. It's a common chord change on guitar, which is pretty tricky to do because the fingers have to move in opposite directions and pretty drastically. If you practice the chord change with both hands, where the strumming hand is doing something, and obviously the fretting hand is doing the chord change, while you're trying to also play in time and also do some elaborate strumming pattern, it's going to be very difficult to focus on the thing that is the problem, which is the chord change. So if you work on the strumming hand separately, where you simply cover the strings, if I grab my guitar here, cover the strings like this with the fretting hand, and then simply strum the strumming pattern with this hand, get the timing down, it's an example of separating the motions, or in this case, kind of the rhythm, from the notes. We're not worried about the chord change, getting the fingers in the right frets. You're just getting the strumming down. Then, when you are working on the chord change, you cover the strings with the picking hand, with the strumming hand, and just do the chord change slowly, focusing on relaxation of the hand and all the mechanics that go into doing a chord change. And by doing that, you are able to give 100% of your attention to the one task at hand, as opposed to trying to split your attention a bunch of different ways, or trying to ride two horses with one ass, as the saying goes. Instead of doing that, you zoom in on one thing, make it better. And that doesn't mean you have to do this for a long time or for days and weeks. If you have just 20 minutes to practice, you can do all the things I just said in the course of those 20 minutes for literally like 60 seconds, 90 seconds at a time. For 90 seconds or for 2 minutes, you just work on the strumming, just the rhythm with no fretting of the notes. Then for the next 2 minutes, you work on the chord change. Then you work on putting the two together. And then you go back to working on the rhythm in isolation and the chord change in isolation and putting the two together. And that becomes like a little miniature circuit that like a merry-go-round, you go through the different phases. You do that for the whole 20 minutes. And then after the 20 minutes, you'll probably find that you can play whatever the challenging part is way better than you could if you were just trying to muscle your way through it from the beginning. So that's a good approach to use when you're learning this stuff.
I think that's very good advice. Sorry for the drill that's just started outside. I'm going to ask you another question quickly. But I was going to add to what you said, actually. I think something that can be helpful is to think about the function of each skill area. And again, what do I want to hear? And so the separating of the two hands, I think, is such good advice, and certainly it would have saved me a lot of time when I was learning. I was definitely the person that was like, oh, find the chord, do a strum. Oh, now we're going to find the next chord and do another strum. Who knows where the beat is? But yeah, if you, oh, for heaven's sake, I'm going to come back to that. So what about, let's imagine, now I know that the lyrics isn't the thing that you you concentrate on. But I'm interested to know, are there any PGN principles that could translate into working on non-PGN sort of lyric-based types of things? Like, for example, separating, I think the one that seems most obvious to me is separating the skills. But I wonder if you've got any other thoughts on that.
Interesting question. Yeah, that's definitely outside of my area of expertise. The one thing I would focus on before I commit to the actually sitting down to write the lyrics is to think about what is it that you want to express. Like, what is the one overarching emotion you want to convey with the song? And that becomes sort of the North Star of everything. And to give kind of an example of the principle I'm drawing this from is, let's say you've got some melody, like a faster melody you're trying to play, and you're trying to see if your practicing is on track. If you're practicing on track with getting you to play it and getting it to sound good, you need to have some idea in your mind of kind of what it should sound like when played correctly. And then you're comparing the repetitions you're doing to how the ideal version of it sounds in your head or in a guitar profile or what have you. And so getting back to the lyrics, if you have the idea that you want to, express the emotion of longing for something, some unattainable ideal, or portray there's some scene of, I don't know, some desperation or something, that will allow you to give yourself feedback on each line of lyrics that you write. Like, does it really build upon what I've already written, and does it help propel me towards conveying that overarching theme that I want to express? That, I think, will be like a 30,000 foot overview of how I would think about the process of writing lyrics. Even though, like I said, it's not really my forte, but I think this will help someone who's struggling with that.
Thank you. I think the separating idea is there's almost a left and right hand idea that we could translate to lyrics, in that you could say that the left hand is the meaning or the subject, and the right hand is the sound characteristics and the rhythmic characteristics of the language. And so I think a Practice Guitar Now approach to writing lyrics would be to separate the sound and the meaning, and work on writing perhaps to specific rhythms. So think about whether the sound of the words is hitting the beat and which beat it's starting on, how many syllables it is. And that's the equivalent of what picking you're doing with the right hand, or, a kind of sweep picking right hand movement might be a certain number of evenly spaced, rhythmically even syllables that are delivered starting on, whichever the beat the bar you decide they should start on. And then the left hand that's giving us the meaning of the kind of key and the melody, that's going to be centering around the words that address the topic. And I never gave any consideration on a conscious level, to the sound or the rhythmic qualities of language. I just never thought about it when I started out. And when I began learning more about it, I was astonished with how much of a difference that can make. Even something like making sure that your important words are lining up with the strong beats affects how easy they are for people to hear them and to know what the song's about and to remember them. So I think the separating right hand, left hand could have a correlation with the lyrics. And it just, in terms of we were talking about this singer, somebody confident singing who's not so confident with guitar and where they might start. And the chords advice is brilliant, because generally speaking, what a singer is going to need in their accompaniment is to have a good choice of chords. So even when you've learnt sort of your open chords, which can be pretty challenging to start with, there's all kinds of other chords that the more chords you've got, the more expressive you can be, especially if you're accompanying yourself by you don't have any other musicians, it's just you. You don't want to be restricted ultimately to the open chords. So I think this ties in with the idea of being rocky and going out to get the skill that is rightfully yours. So you're going down to the mine of skills, and you're like, with your chisel, and just putting more skill in your bucket. It's now, it's for you. You can just go and get it whenever you want. So in common with that kind of idea, thinking about what your favorite artists, thinking about what you want to hear. Do I want to hear, what kind of guitar sounds do I want to hear? And thinking about your favorite artists, that gives you some parameters for where you might want to focus next. And it makes you more discerning and more in charge of the having a creative trajectory that's uniquely yours. And I think it's also easier to commit to effort on a sustained basis when you know what it is you're going for and why you're going for it. Otherwise, we could buy this book, that book, this video call, you know, we just might do a bit of this and a bit of that. And I've definitely been guilty of that. So what about the, let's imagine that we're a guitarist who finds it pretty easy to come up with riffs and fragments of guitar, but they can't really join those up. Any thoughts on that? They find it hard to kind of turn that into anything else, into a finished song.
Hold on, let me clarify the question real quick. So you're asking that they're writing, they have an easy time writing riffs, but then they have a hard time joining those up. So you mean like
Exactly.
the physical aspect of connecting difficult parts together?
Yes, physical aspect of connecting different sections together.
Gotcha. Okay, cool. So the simple thing to do is to isolate the transition points. So imagine you have section A that's, let's say, 4 measures long. Four beats long to keep it real short. And section B that's also 4 beats long. You want to create sort of a section C that you practice, which is really the 4th beat of section A and the 1st beat of section B. And that becomes its own loop that you practice, just simply making that transition smoother. Because oftentimes where guitar players struggle when it comes to connecting difficult parts is they have so many notes that they spend so much time playing the parts that are already easy for them, and they don't repeat the hard part enough times because they don't isolate the difficult chunk properly. And so the solution to that is to simply create this little loop that I said, where it's basically the ending of the first part to the beginning of the second part, and that allows you to make that super smooth. And then you simply work your way outwards, where you make the isolated chunk you created and make it a little bit longer by adding a few more notes at its beginning and a few more notes at its end. Before you know it, then you're playing the whole larger section, and it's smooth now because you've practiced that seam, as my friend Tom Hess would describe it. You practice that seam to make, and then you remove the seam, so the whole section doesn't sound like too, like, imagine if you have jigsaw puzzle. You know, when it's put together, you can still kind of see where the seams are of each piece. But imagine if you removed all those seams, and now you're just seeing the picture without the parts where the pieces were put into place. That's how you want it to see. You want to see the picture without the seams. That's the goal.
Cool. Yes. I think also what that makes me think of something else that quite often it's the unseen bit. So that you got this bit and that bit, and you need to create out of those 2 bits a kind of bracket that's a 3rd piece. And so conceptually, you're thinking of it not just this part and that part, and I travel between them, but there's another part here that's, hang on, here we go, part A, part B, and you're making a little bracket that goes from part A to part B, and this is a 3rd thing. And I think singing and playing at the same time, which is a very common area of struggle for people, is exactly like that, because we've got singing and we've got playing, but the synchronization of those 2 things is a 3rd thing. And quite often there's nothing, without anyone telling you that the synchronization is a 3rd thing, you wouldn't know. Like, how would you know? You just see people singing and playing. And it's something I'm really interested in, because when you perform by yourself, it's very nice to be able to do as many different kinds of accompaniment style as possible. And I went through a phase of training myself to sing over slow sweeping, because I wanted to have that melodic sound as a possible alternative. And because it's really, and I'm not by any means an especially technical guitar player, and it was perfectly doable. So I think a lot of these things, we don't necessarily think that they're possible. Well, they seem like they would be difficult, but it's just because we haven't kind of like done that 3rd chunk. So now that's a key thing for singing and playing, and for getting between transitions of difficult bits. So it seems to me that quite a lot of what we've been talking about is partly a learning curve of observation. So I just said, you know, when you start out, how would you know that there's this synchronizing part? a sort of observing in a zoomed out way both what it is we'd like to hear. So if you're writing and you're like, well, I am really influenced by, this particular artist over here, and I want to create those kinds of sounds. I love how, doesn't mean it won't actually sound like that. It's just coming sort of through you, but you at least are setting some kind of guidance for yourself for what area it is you want to create in. So in a zoomed out way, you're making certain observations and definitions for yourself of that. Like, what do you want to hear? And also a zoomed out observation of where it is that you're currently at, and then zooming right in to see in as zoomed in a way as possible exactly where we're at, then working out if we can try, how can we break down those elements. So it's the more analytical we can become, the more we're going to be able to do that for ourselves.
Yes.
Would you agree with this? And do you
I
have
do.
any advice for anyone listening? No, first of all, yeah. Okay, so first of all, do you agree?
I do agree, and I have a lot really to say about this. I'm going to do my best not to ramble and not to lose my train of thought. So what you mentioned with zooming in and zooming out is a fantastic metaphor for really all aspects of practicing and really skill learning in general. You want to kind of see on a micro level what exactly is going on. Like, I don't know, if you're practicing picking technique, like how you angle the pick and like all these minute details. And then you also want to zoom out and ask yourself, okay, am I actually in time? Am I playing? Are my notes in tune? Those kinds of things. So when it comes to songwriting as well, and also ultimately everything, I think, certainly everything that comes to music, including the idea of practicing, are just skills, and everything breaks down into micro skills. So like songwriting, and I don't want to put words in your mouth, and you let me know if you disagree, but I think that songwriting is not really one thing. It's one big thing that is like, again, the jigsaw puzzle consisting of a bunch of different pieces that all fit together to create the ability to write songs. And so you want to identify which of those pieces you want to work on, as we talked about. And as far as developing your own style, that's one of the most fun parts. One of the most fun parts of developing your own style is that you can look at different musicians who embody certain elements of songwriting, those little pieces of the jigsaw puzzle, like how somebody may use rhythm, how somebody may use harmony, how somebody may write lyrics, and you then become like a hybrid version of all these influences that you have. I think, in my mind, that is what having a truly unique style is all about, because nobody has the exact same tastes in music that you do or that I do. And by looking at all the music that exists that inspires you, you pick out little bits and pieces of different musicians and or guitar players that you like, and then you try to develop those areas in your playing, in your songwriting abilities, and then you become somebody that the world has never really quite seen or heard, even though they can pick out, okay, you're influenced by this guy or this girl, and and so on and so forth. But by and large, your music sounds very unique and specific to you. And that's where the style comes from. So that's a long-winded answer to your question of, do I agree? Yes, I do.
Well, I think it's very interesting to hear your take on it. And obviously songwriting is all this composite form of this collection of different skills. And that's one of the things that's brilliant about it. One of the things that means nobody really sounds like anybody else, really. And also one of the things that's quite challenging about it, in terms of knowing what to do to get to the point where you are able to express what it is that you want to express to it. Would you have anything to say to somebody who might view this analytical, observational thing as who may have come to music in a much more instinctive way and sort of may find this slightly alien as an approach? Do we have any advice for that person?
I do. So when you say more instinctive way, it kind of implies, or this is the way I understand it, is that somebody may have natural talent for at least getting to a certain level, whether it's in their guitar playing or in their songwriting, where they didn't really need to learn the skill. By the way, I don't remember if I mentioned this in my last answer, but practicing guitar, the ability to practice, is also a skill, which also breaks down into micro skills and all the rest of it. And so if somebody is a little bit more instinctive or intuitive with how they've learned things, that excuse me, that just means they have a certain amount of natural talent, i.e. tendency to learn things kind of the right way on their own by pure instinct, without having to learn how to do it. But there's like probably, I don't know, I don't have the statistics in my mind, but it's very, very rare that somebody is truly ultra talented across all the skills you would need to become the musician or the songwriter or the guitar player you want to be. And so what that means is, to answer your question, it's pretty much inevitable for the vast majority of people that even if you are a little bit intuitive in the beginning, you will come across a time where you need to actually develop certain skills that don't come naturally to you. For example, in my particular case, I was maybe a little bit above average in terms of talent for guitar technique, which doesn't mean I was like born with great technique. It just means that I found it more enjoyable to practice. I was able to just grasp what it meant to practice technique correctly, and I wanted to do it more. So that, in combination with everything, allowed me to improve a little bit faster. But I was very, very untalented when it came to training my ear, for example. I struggled like heck with that, and that's a separate story for another time. And so the answer to your question, Deanna, is it's pretty much inevitable that we're all going to face the time in our life when we're like, okay, this is a skill I don't have a lot of intuitive, natural ability to learn. And so that's okay. It's doesn't mean not any negative judgment on you or your potential or anything like that. It's just, okay, everybody is different levels of intuitive talent in certain areas. And when you come across yours, you just work on it and you just figure out what are the micro skills that you need to develop, practice them, and you get better at them. And if you are super, the Mozart level talented, where everything comes naturally to you, then you're probably not watching this video. And so, what do they care what we have to say? So anyway, those are my thoughts.
Yes, true. When you were saying that, it reminded me of playing in a band once where somebody had a particular part they wanted me to learn. And I asked them to write it down, and they're like, oh, can't you just feel it? And then they played it, and then they played it slightly differently, and then they played it a third time. And I remember at the time, it was this thing that we sort of touched on earlier of people having different versions of what it means to be interested in music and how to go about it. And, in that kind of situation, I was being made to feel like I was ungroovy and lacking in natural musical mojo for not like picking up what it was supposed to be. But actually, if somebody can't define for you in exact musical detail where it is they want each note to land relative to the pulse, if they don't know what that is and they can't tell you what it is, that's a little bit more work they have to do getting clear on their vision, let's say.
Yep.
It's sort of it's easy to be made to feel like you're the inadequate one for seeking complete clarity, but if somebody can't give that to you, that's really not a shortcoming on your side. So we've spoken a little bit about how to arrange your mind to encounter your limitations in a constructive way, and how we might go about breaking things down and finding a few training activities and separating skills into different categories and working on them individually, whether it's left hand, right hand, or whether it's melodies or whether it's word sound, word meaning. Let's imagine, like, how might we go about structuring those in our lives? Like, let's imagine that I want to work on my singing and my improvising skills and my chord vocabulary, and I also want to make sure I'm putting a certain amount of time into writing activities. And all of that is true. But anyone who sees this is going to have their own sort of version of that. Now, I don't really have time on a day-to-day basis to do half an hour in all of those areas. There's some days I might not have any time, other days I might have 40 minutes, other days I might have an hour, other days I might have 15 minutes. Am I better off in concentrating on one thing for a period of time than switching focus to another thing? I was thinking about this earlier, and I was reminded of the Schlieffen Plan, which was, I think it was a military plan. I think it was World War I, and it basically was the German Foreign Minister von Schlieffen, who designed a plan to not split Germany's forces in two. So rather than having 50% on the Eastern Front and 50% on the Western Front, had like 10 or 20% just holding the line over there and the majority over there. And I was like, maybe we need a Schlieffen plan for our music. So we keep things bubbling along, but we're pushing forward a bit in one area. And then we keep that thing bubbling along, we push forward on another area. Any thoughts on that?
Yes, I do. So it kind of depends on what the goals that you have are. But when I say goals, I don't mean like long term, 3, 5, 10 years from now. I mean like more immediate, a month from now, 2 months from now, or up to 3 months from now. And the type of goals I'm talking about is, let's say you are actually trying to compose a certain piece of music versus you don't have a goal like that, or I perform a certain piece of music, let's say, and or if you don't have a goal like that, you're simply just looking to become a better overall songwriter. Those are two kind of different paradigms, because if it's the first one, then you have a very concrete thing you're trying to achieve with a certain deadline attached to it. You don't really need to worry about all the general skills that go into songwriting or guitar playing. You just need to focus on that one thing. Like, let's make it a little specific. Let's say you're looking to perform a piece of music, and it's already written, and the parts you're struggling with are just physical guitar playing parts. Let's say you're learning to sing the lyrics in time with the actual guitar parts. Then that is simply the one part you practice. You spend however much time you've got on that day, 15 minutes, an hour, whatever, just on that one weakness, because that is the bottleneck that may prevent you from performing and reaching your goal. But then once the deadline passes and you've done the best that you can with it, then you kind of zoom out. And at that point, it becomes almost less important to worry about if you're finding the right frequency versus is to hit a bunch of areas in rotation in some way, shape, or form, knowing that it's never really going to be perfect, but it's never going to be bad. You almost can't mess it up. That's the point. As long as you keep like a running list of the general things you want to work on, and you are sort of rotating through it in somewhat of an orderly fashion, which again, I don't want to get too prescriptive here with what that might look like, because there's almost no way to screw it up as long as you make some attempt to follow the list of the micro skills we've been talking about. And you can work on them in isolation, or as Tom Hess would call this, in an integrated way, where the isolated way is pretty self-explanatory. Let's say if you're trying to work on writing lyrics, well, you sit there and you write lyrics and you follow the process that goes into that. But the integration can be, let's say you come up with a rhythm, like a rhythmic pattern, and you come up with a certain and you're trying to improvise a melody using that rhythm. So you're integrating your ear, your oral ability to hear notes, with your ability to come up with a rhythm and play it in time and improvise a melody at the same time using that rhythm. So it's an integrated task that combines several elements of musicianship that you're getting better at the same time. But to kind of bring it home, the two main camps is, do you have a goal with a deadline that you're working towards, or do you not? If you do, you can just focus on the 1 or 2 or 3 biggest bottlenecks that can keep you from succeeding at the goal, and pour all your resources and energy and time into that. And when that is done, you simply rotate through the skills on your big master list that you're hopefully developing in some orderly fashion through rotation, and you will be in good shape.
I think that's really helpful advice. Certainly, it's happened to me that I've had a gig come up and now I have to learn 30 pop songs from the last 2 years. So everything else goes out the window, and I'm like, espresso, whatever it is. And then I'll be like, wait, what was I doing? So I think having and of course that's going to happen sometimes, and it's less important, I think, what happens in 1 month or even 3 months than what happens over 3 years or 5 years. And as long as you keep going back to the things that are important to you and nourishing those, or going down those mines from time to time, you will develop. But I think one of the biggest shifts that happened for me was when I got to a point where music was more than learning pieces or songs. So when I separated my conception of music and music performance from repertoire to there being these abstract skill areas that one could develop, and by focusing on them rather than simply them developing as a side effect of the repertoire, and understanding that doing that would then make the repertoire easier to get to grips with. So this has been super great. I've definitely absorbed much goodness from it, and will think of myself as Rocky from now on. But I'm curious, for someone with an apparently bulletproof mindset, has there been a time when there was something in your own playing that you either remember feeling very stoked to have accurately figured out? You're like, wait a minute, I've kind of found this, I've discovered this is brilliant. Or when you were not excited to keep going with fixing a particular aspect of your playing, and it really sort of felt like a drag. Like, how did you regain and sustain your enthusiasm if you've had one of those experiences?
I can speak to both of those. So the first one, the one that made me feel really proud to have accurately figured out, was I had a finger independence issue in my fretting hand, which is kind of ironic because I'm naturally left-handed. So you would think that left-handed stuff would be easier for me on guitar, but it wasn't, because I had a big issue with like my finger tensing when I was trying to play faster. And it took me a long time to learn just the right way to apply just the right amount of pressure with my other fingers to keep the pinky relaxed. How I did that, we could be here for another 2 hours talking about that, but it took me about 2.5 months of like 2 hours a day of just working on that. And when my parents would walk into the room to see me practicing, I was just sitting there and like barely moving. And they were like, "What are you doing?" Well, I'm trying to get, the right amount of pressure with the finger to the string, which looked really weird, sounded really weird. But once I got it, I felt not just proud to have figured that piece out, but it made me more confident. Like, hey, if I went from completely sucking at this to being able to do it, that pretty much confirmed that I can probably achieve a lot with a lot of other areas of playing too. Conversely, though, the part that really made me question like if I was even fit to be a musician was I mentioned ear training a little while ago. When I first got to college, I took an ear training class, and I've never felt more humbled by my lack of music ability than in my first probably like 2 or 3 months of ear training, because everybody seemed to be picking it up but me. Like I felt like I was the only one who didn't get it. And what I really did there was I asked myself, okay, in the past, when I faced difficulty, what did I do? Well, I simply went all in on that one issue and let everything else sit. And so I did that. I went, to office hours, met with the teaching assistant, and I was practicing ear training only for like 3, 4, 5 hours a day. And eventually, towards the end of the semester, I started to get it. And so the real lesson I got from that is there's pretty much a way to reverse engineer almost anything. That is the belief that I have, whether true or not, that I try to bring to every challenging thing. And then if I can't figure it out, there's probably somebody out there who already has, and I'm just going to find that person and get them to help me. And that has been a something that's been very helpful to me just in all areas of my life. So hopefully that was helpful.
Well, I think you make the thing I really want to point out for anyone who watches this is about what you just said, is the idea that it's going to be possible to reverse engineer things, because you said that you're not sure, you can't necessarily prove whether that's correct or not across everything, but you've also shown an example of when it was true. And it, in a way, it's immaterial if there existed a situation where it wasn't true. It's almost immaterial because it's an act of taking ownership of your own trajectory at the deepest possible level. And that has got to do with legitimacy as well. It has got to do with a certain sense that you can own your path, and you can ultimately, whatever teacher you find, they may or may not be able to diagnose your issues as well as you can after you've reached a certain level of experience. So that thing of like, well, there's got to be a way to fix this. Last time and that what you said about the first breakthrough you had giving you confidence that you'd be able to fix things in future. I think those are really key points. And I definitely remember when I was starting out with songwriting and when I switched from just playing guitar in bands to writing my own songs and performing them, I definitely thought somebody was going to just like pop out from behind a curtain and be like, no, you're not allowed. The Great Council of Songwriters has not validated your permit. Please stop. So I think this thing of very consciously legitimizing what we're doing and not using our current level of skill or experience or visibility or anything else as the yardstick by which we're allowed to decide what it is we want to create or what it is we might need to work on next is really important. And even if that means that you might want to go and seek a certain kind of support, at least who's going to be able to help you, or what it is you're looking for exactly, and then that puts you in a much better position to find it, because like anyone can apparently anyone can say I'm a teacher. So if you don't have any better way of asking for the exact support that you need, then it's going to be quite random as to whether the people that you might end up working with, however well-intentioned, are going to be able to help you or not. And another thing that I remember from my early experience is that if I went to have a lesson with somebody, and I had some terrible teachers. I mean, so one guy left a lesson and went to pee in the alley before coming back to the lesson, which is really weird. We're in his house. Surely he had a bathroom. Been wondering about that for 25 years. So, what in those experiences, I still thought of myself as I don't know anything. So if I didn't get this, or if this doesn't feel like it connects, it must be my fault for being dumb. So that's what I really want to point out for people about what you just said. Now, Mike has got some goodies for you. Can you tell us a little bit more about this?
Yes. This is a masterclass on 5 simple but non-obvious ways to speed up your musical progress in really all areas of guitar playing. Even though I specialize in technique and electric guitar playing, this specific masterclass is on more general things that really apply to songwriting or any other non-technique related musical skill you want to get better at. And it's all free on my website. You can check it out at this link here, practiceguitarnow.com/progress. So check it out, and you can apply these things to your practice session as early as tomorrow and start seeing more gains. So enjoy.
I will paste the link in the progress when we're the link in the chat when we're done. If anyone who doesn't see this, I also have something. This is an ebook with 5 great ways to write great lyrics. I wish I'd had this when I started out, because then none of the East London hipsters would have been able to put me down for my songwriting, or I wouldn't have listened to them, because I'd have been like, well, I know what I'm doing. It's basically got what I think are some pretty game-changing ways of thinking about your lyrics. I think one of the hard things about writing lyrics is that when you listen to songs as a fan, you would never know that there's any system, or that there's any consistent way you can break things down and evaluate things. I certainly didn't. So I just wrote things and hoped for the best. And sometimes that worked out and sometimes it did not. But it's frustrating being stuck in that kind of situation, because eventually you don't really know if you're ever going to improve. So this has got a few really helpful ways that you can think about your lyrics and whether they are expressing what you want them to express. It's got some writing prompts to help you get into a system of practicing songwriting, because something else I never knew is that you can essentially work on the skills that comprise lyric writing individually, but you can't do that if you don't know they exist. So I'm going to put this end slide up that has both of these, and I'm going to I'll hide that. Well, we'll come back to that in a sec. Wait a minute. I'm just going to first say thank you very much to Mike, and I've really enjoyed hearing your thoughts on these topics. So thanks for coming on, and I look forward to following your material online. And I'm sure everyone who downloads Mike's giveaway is going to really get a lot out of it. So I urge you to do that.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you, everybody, for listening.